She thought she could get away with it, but karma had other plans.
Elaine Richardson, a 42-year-old real estate agent, was having a particularly stressful day. Her listing fell through, her coffee spilled on her designer blouse, and now the grocery store was out of her favorite imported sparkling water. When the young cashier, Miguel, explained they wouldn't get a new shipment until Thursday, Elaine erupted. She demanded to see the manager, insisted Miguel was hiding stock in the back, and filmed the entire interaction for her social media. What Elaine failed to notice was the store's owner standing in line behind her, witnessing her berating his staff over something completely beyond their control. The morning had started with such promise. Elaine had woken up early, put on her power suit, and prepared her presentation for the Wilsons, who were selling their waterfront property. The commission alone would cover her new kitchen renovation. She had spent weeks cultivating this relationship, sending thoughtful follow-up emails and even remembering their anniversary with a small gift basket. But 20 minutes before their meeting, her phone rang. The Wilsons had decided to go with another agent, her rival Sandra, who had undercut her commission by 0.5%. "It's just business," Mr. Wilson had said apologetically, "nothing personal." But to Elaine, everything was personal. She had thrown her phone across the car seat and pedaled out of her parking spot, stopping at her favorite cafe to regroup. That's when a college student rushing to class had bumped her elbow, sending her $7 lavender latte cascading down her silk blouse. The student had apologized profusely, offering napkins and even money for dry cleaning, but Elaine had cut her off. "Do you have any idea how much this costs?" she had snapped, gesturing to her outfit. "More than you probably make in a month." The cafe had gone quiet, other patrons exchanging uncomfortable glances. The barista, who knew Elaine as a regular but difficult customer, had offered her a free replacement drink, which she had accepted without thanks before storming out. By the time Elaine reached Hartley's grocery, her mood was thunderous. The store represented the last bastion of control in her rapidly deteriorating day. She needed her specific brand of sparkling water for an open house tomorrow, the kind with hints of cucumber and mint that impressed potential buyers and made her seem sophisticated and worldly. The fact that the shelf stood empty felt like a personal affront. "What do you mean you're out?" she demanded, leaning across the checkout counter toward Miguel, whose name tag identified him as a new employee. "I drive all the way across town specifically for this water. I don't understand how you could be so incompetent as to not keep it stocked." Miguel, only 19 and working to help support his grandmother, tried to remain professional. "I apologize for the inconvenience, ma'am. Our delivery truck comes on Thursdays. I'd be happy to call another store to see if they have it in stock." "Don't bother," Elaine cut him off, pulling out her phone. "I don't want to speak to whoever's in charge of inventory. This is ridiculous. I spend thousands here every year." The line behind her grew. A woman with a fussing toddler checked her watch. An elderly man leaned heavily on his cart. But Elaine was oblivious to their discomfort, focused entirely on her own inconvenience as she began recording. "I'm live on Instagram right now," she announced loudly, turning her phone to capture Miguel's increasingly uncomfortable expression. "I want everyone to see how Hartley's Grocery treats their loyal customers. This young man refuses to check the back for my sparkling water." "Ma'am, I already checked. We don't have any," Miguel explained, his voice strained but still polite. "What check again?" she demanded, her voice rising. "And get your manager while you're at it. I want everybody to know how incompetent the staff is here." What Elaine didn't realize was that David Hartley himself, owner of the small chain of local grocery stores, was standing 3 customers behind her. He had stopped by this location to check on recent renovations and was paying up a few items before heading to his next store. As Elaine's tirade escalated, David's expression darkened. He had built his business on respect for his products, his customers, and especially his employees. By the time Elaine returned to her car, her phone was buzzing with notifications. The store owner had captured her tirade on his own phone and posted it to the community Facebook page, tagging her real estate business. The video quickly spread through their small town, with residents sharing stories of similar encounters with grocery store Karen. Elaine's inbox filled with canceled viewings and withdrawn offers as potential clients distanced themselves from her increasingly toxic reputation. David Hartley wasn't typically one for public confrontation. In his 25 years of grocery retail, he had always believed in handling difficult situations privately. But something about the young cashier's expression, the mixture of humiliation and helplessness as Elaine berated him, had triggered a protective instinct David couldn't ignore. After stepping out of line to introduce himself as the owner, he had calmly asked Elaine to stop recording. "This young man is following our store policy exactly as he should," David had explained. "We can't control delivery schedules any more than we can control the weather." Elaine had been momentarily startled by the intervention but recovered quickly. "Weather policies are ridiculous. I've been coming here for years and the service gets worse every time." That was when David had made a decision. He pulled out his own phone and began recording. Since you feel it's appropriate to publicly shame my employees for things beyond their control, I think our community might be interested in seeing the full interaction, he said, including the part where multiple people have been waiting patiently while you create this scene. Elaine had huffed, abandoned her half-filled shopping cart, and stormed out. She had assumed that would be the end of it, another justified complaint about poor service that would be forgotten by dinner. She didn't give it another thought as she drove across town to the competing grocery store for her sparkling water. But by 3:15 p.m., her phone wouldn't stop vibrating. First came the text from her assistant, "Have you seen Hartley's Facebook page?" Then a call from her broker. "Elaine, we need to talk about damage control." By the time she checked social media, David's video had accumulated over 700 shares and nearly 2,000 comments, almost all of them negative. Classic Maple Crest Karen behavior. Read one comment with dozens of likes. "I watched her make a barista cry last month over foam," said another. "Isn't this the same woman who tried to get my landscaper fined for using a leaf blower before 9 a.m.? Asked a local dentist whose name Elaine recognized with a sinking feeling. He had been considering listing his house with her next month. The comment section had become a town-wide confessional of Elaine encounters, with residents from across Maple Crest sharing their own stories. Her professional page was flooded with one-star reviews, many from people she'd never even met. The hashtag grocery store Karen was trending locally, with her perfectly curated profile photo appearing alongside mocking memes and GIFs. By 5:00 p.m., her broker had called an emergency meeting. "This is a small town, Elaine," he said gravely across his mahogany desk. "Our business relies on relationships and goodwill. 3 of your scheduled showings for tomorrow have already canceled." "It was imported water, Richard," she protested weakly. "I was having a bad day." "It wasn't about the water," he replied, sliding his tablet across the desk to show her the video's comment section. "According to about 50 of our neighbors, it's about a pattern." As she scrolled through the comments, Elaine felt a strange hollowing sensation in her chest. There were so many incidents she barely remembered. A complaint about slow service here, a demand to speak to a manager there, small moments she had dismissed as standing up for herself that others had carried as wounds. Her phone buzzed again. The Andersons, her biggest potential listing of the month, were canceling tomorrow's consultation. "We've decided to go in another direction," the message read. Just like the Wilsons that morning, but this time she knew exactly why. Meanwhile, across town, Jennifer Walters was creating a scene at Bellini's, the most upscale restaurant in the area. Despite arriving 45 minutes late for her reservation, Jennifer demanded her table be held. When the hostess politely explained they had given it to another party after trying to call her multiple times, Jennifer unleashed a tirade about her importance as a regular customer and threatened to have everyone fired. What Jennifer didn't realize was that the restaurant's chef and owner, Antonio, was the brother of Miguel from the grocery store. Jennifer Walters prided herself on being a woman of status in Maple Crest. As the marketing director for a regional luxury real estate developer, she considered herself the arbiter of taste and exclusivity. Her Friday evening reservations at Bellini's had been a standing tradition for 3 years, always at 7:00 p.m., always at table 12 by the window, always with whichever influential person she was cultivating that week. Tonight's dinner companion was Councilwoman Diane Peters, whose vote would be crucial for her company's upcoming lakefront development project. Jennifer had spent weeks arranging this casual dinner between friends, careful to frame it as anything but the lobbying effort it truly was. The councilwoman had agreed to meet at 7:15, giving Jennifer time to arrive first and set the tone. But a last-minute call from her CEO had kept Jennifer at the office until 7:30, and traffic had been unexpectedly heavy. She hadn't bothered calling the restaurant after all. They knew who she was. They wouldn't dare give away her table. By the time Jennifer strode through Bellini's elegant doors at 7:47 p.m., her irritation had already been stoked by 2 parking tickets she'd received for leaving her Mercedes in a loading zone. She approached the hostess stand with the confidence of someone who expected immediate accommodation. "Jennifer Walters, table 12, she announced without a greeting, not even bothering to remove her designer sunglasses despite the dimly lit interior. Sophia, the 26-year-old hostess working her way through graduate school, checked the reservation system with growing apprehension. "Ms. Walters, I see your reservation was for 7:00 p.m. We tried calling you several times." And Jennifer's voice carried across the bustling restaurant, causing nearby diners to glance up from their meals. "I'm very sorry, but after 30 minutes we had to release the table. We have a waiting list on Friday nights and—" "Do you have any idea who I am?" Jennifer cut her off, placing her Hermes handbag on the hostess stand with enough force to rattle the reservation tablet. "I've been coming here since before you were hired. Table 12 is my table. I need it right now. Councilwoman Peters will be here any minute." Sophia maintained her professional composure, though her cheeks had flushed with embarrassment as other guests began to stare. We can certainly accommodate you as soon as possible. Perhaps I could offer you a complimentary drink at the bar while we prepare another table? I don't want another table. Jennifer's voice rose further. I specifically need table 12 for this meeting. The lighting is better for my social media posts. An older couple seated nearby exchanged uncomfortable glances. The man, recognizing Jennifer from community events, self-consciously angled his menu to partially shield his face. That's not possible tonight, Ms. Walters. Table 12 is currently occupied by guests who had a reservation after yours and arrived on time. Sophia's voice remained steady, though her hands had begun to tremble slightly. They're in the middle of their main course. Jennifer leaned across the hostess stand, lowering her voice to a threatening whisper. Then, unoccupy it. Offer them dessert at the bar. Move them. I don't care how, but make it happen, or I'll be speaking with Antonio about finding a hostess who understands how this business works. What Jennifer failed to notice was the tall, olive-skinned man who had emerged from the kitchen, wiping his hands on a towel as he surveyed the disruption in his dining room. Antonio Ricci had spent the past hour perfecting a new risotto special when his sous chef mentioned there was a situation developing at the front. Normally, he would let his staff handle such matters, but he'd already been on edge after receiving a distressing call from his younger brother, Miguel, earlier that afternoon. Antonio recognized Jennifer as a frequent complainer who routinely sent back perfectly good dishes and treated his staff poorly. After hearing about his brother's encounter earlier that day, Antonio had enough. He calmly approached Jennifer's table and asked her to leave, informing her that Bellini's would no longer be accepting her reservations. As Jennifer stormed out, other diners, many of whom had seen the earlier grocery store video, applauded Antonio's decision to stand up for his staff. Antonio Ricci had built Bellini's from nothing after immigrating to the United States 15 years ago. What began as a small pasta shop had grown into Maple Crest's premier dining destination, earning write-ups in regional magazines and even a mention in a national food publication. He took immense pride in his restaurant, but even more in the family-like atmosphere he cultivated among his staff. Many of his employees had been with him for years, and he viewed their well-being as his personal responsibility. Which was why, as he approached the hostess stand and observed Sophia's distress, he felt a protective anger rising in his chest, the same anger he felt earlier when Miguel had called him in tears. My brother works so hard, Miguel had told him. Abuela's medication costs so much, and this job helps us afford it. But this woman, she recorded me, Antonio. She put me online. People are making fun of me. Now seeing Jennifer Walters berating his hostess, the connection clicked into place. She was cut from the same cloth as the woman who had humiliated Miguel, privileged, entitled, and completely unconcerned with the humanity of service workers. Ms. Walters, Antonio interrupted, his voice carrying the quiet authority that had helped him manage a chaotic kitchen for years. I couldn't help but overgive the situation. Jennifer turned, her expression shifting from anger to practiced charm. Antonio, thank goodness. Please explain to your staff that my standing reservation at table 12 should be honored regardless of timing. I have the councilwoman joining me shortly for an important meeting. Antonio nodded thoughtfully. I understand completely. Connections are important in a small town. He paused, letting the words settle. That's actually why I wanted to speak with you directly. You see, my younger brother Miguel called me quite upset this afternoon. Jennifer's expression remained pleasant but confused. The name meant nothing to her. He works at Hartley's Grocery, Antonio continued. A customer berated him today over sparkling water. Created quite a scene. The video was all over Facebook. At the mention of the video, several nearby diners exchanged knowing glances. One woman discreetly pulled out her phone, presumably to check the viral post. That's unfortunate, Jennifer said dismissively, but I don't see what that has to do with my table. Community, Antonio replied simply. In a town like Maple Crest, we're all connected. The woman who humiliated my brother today probably thought her actions wouldn't have consequences beyond that moment. She was wrong. His gaze was unwavering. Just as you're wrong to think you can arrive nearly an hour late, threaten my staff, and still be welcomed here. Color rose in Jennifer's cheeks. Are you refusing me service? Do you have any idea how much money I've spent here over the years? Not nearly enough to compensate for how you treat people, Antonio replied calmly. Bellini's will no longer be accepting your reservations, Ms. Walters. I wish you well finding another establishment that better suits your particular approach to customer service. The restaurant had gone silent, forks paused midair as diners witnessed the exchange. Jennifer glanced around, suddenly aware of being the focal point of everyone's attention, but not in the way she typically craved. This is outrageous. I'll destroy you on Yelp, she sputtered. From a corner table, a woman spoke up. Actually, I just checked, and there's already a new 5-star review for Bellini's being drafted on my phone. Chef stands up for workers' rights. Should I add anything else, Antonio? A ripple of laughter spread through the restaurant, followed by something even more mortifying to Jennifer: applause. Not for her, but for the chef and his staff. As Jennifer gathered her handbag and backed toward the door, she noticed a familiar face at the bar: Councilwoman Peters, sipping a martini and watching the scene unfold with undisguised interest. Their eyes met briefly before the councilwoman deliberately turned away to strike up a conversation with the bartender. The following evening, both Elaine and Jennifer attended their neighborhood's homeowners association meeting, unaware they lived only streets apart. The meeting's agenda included a discussion about community standards and neighborly conduct. When Elaine stood to complain about her neighbor's wind chimes and Jennifer interrupted to demand action against eyesore gardens, the HOA president, Mrs. Chen, recognized them both from the now viral videos circulating in town. The Maple Crest Community Center hadn't seen this large a turnout for an HOA meeting in years. Typically, these monthly gatherings attracted the same dozen or so dedicated residents, mostly retirees with time on their hands and strong opinions about fence heights. Tonight, however, the room was packed, with folding chairs hastily brought in from storage to accommodate the overflow crowd. Elaine Richardson had arrived early, as was her custom, securing a seat in the second row. She had spent most of the day hiding in her home office, avoiding calls and trying to salvage what business relationships she could. Her social media accounts had been set to private. Her broker had suggested she take a week off, and she received 3 anonymous deliveries of sparkling water on her doorstep, each with a sarcastic note about customer service. The HOA meeting felt like a relief, familiar territory where she still commanded respect. Jennifer Walters arrived 7 minutes after the scheduled start time, making a point to let her heels click loudly on the linoleum floor as she found one of the few remaining seats in the back. She was still seething from the previous night's humiliation at Bellini's. Worse, Councilwoman Peters had canceled their rescheduled lunch meeting with a terse email about conflicting community values. Jennifer needed a win, and the HOA meeting, where she typically dominated discussions, seemed the perfect place to reassert her authority. Neither woman noticed the other, nor did they register the unusual number of smartphone cameras discreetly positioned throughout the room. Mrs. Chen, a retired high school principal who had led the HOA for the past 5 years, called the meeting to order. With Mrs. Chen seized the opportunity to address the growing problem of hostile behavior in their community. Without naming names, she outlined recent incidents that had reflected poorly on their neighborhood. As she spoke, other residents began to connect the dots, recognizing Elaine and Jennifer from the videos. What started as whispers evolved into direct questions about how these women expected respect from the community when they showed none to others. A weighted silence fell over the room as Mrs. Chen's question hung in the air. Elaine's posture stiffened. Jennifer's fingers tightened around her designer pen. "I'm not sure what you're referring to," Elaine replied, her voice artificially light. "We're discussing wind chimes, not—" "I think we all know what Mrs. Chen is referring to," interjected Tom Harmon, a retired judge who rarely spoke at meetings. "My grandson works at Hartley's Grocery. He showed me a certain video yesterday." He turned in his seat to face Elaine directly. "That young man you berated is putting himself through community college. His family immigrated here 5 years ago. Is that the Maple Crest welcome you want to represent?" Elaine's cheeks burned. "That was a personal matter between me and the store. It has nothing to do with—" "And I was at Bellini's last night," added Patricia Winters, Eleanor's daughter. She looked toward the back of the room where Jennifer sat. "Quite a performance. The staff was still talking about it when I picked up lunch today." Mrs. Chen raised her hand for order as murmurs spread through the room. "My point," she continued firmly, "is that our HOA exists to maintain standards that benefit everyone in our community. Those standards aren't just about lawn height and fence colors. They're about how we treat each other." She removed her reading glasses again, addressing the room more personally. "I've lived in Maple Crest for 42 years. I raised my children here. I taught many of your children at the high school. This has always been a community where neighbors looked out for each other." Several heads nodded in agreement. Lately, however, I've noticed a troubling trend. Some among us seem to believe that living in this neighborhood entitles them to special treatment everywhere they go. Mrs. Chen's gaze drifted briefly toward Elaine and Jennifer. That their convenience matters more than others' dignity. That rules apply to everyone except themselves. Marco Diaz, owner of the local hardware store, stood up. "My niece works at the cafe on Main Street. She's come home in tears twice this month because of customers who thought their fancy coffee orders gave them the right to humiliate a 19-year-old. One of them is in this room." All eyes turned to Elaine, who seemed to shrink into her chair. "We've all seen the videos," continued Marco. "But it's not just about what happened yesterday or the day before. It's about a pattern that's been going on for years while the rest of us stayed silent to keep the peace." From the back of the room, Jennifer attempted to regain control. "This is completely inappropriate for an HOA meeting," she announced sharply. "If you have personal grievances, there are proper channels. like screaming at restaurant staff, called out someone from the middle rows, prompting nervous laughter. Mrs. Chen rapped her gavel once. I agree that personal attacks are not productive. However, I believe this conversation is entirely relevant to our community standards. She consulted her notes. In fact, the next item on our agenda is a proposal to establish a Maple Crest Community Conduct Covenant. She distributed a single-page document that had been prepared in advance. This covenant outlines basic expectations for how Maple Crest residents represent our community, both within our neighborhood and throughout the town. It emphasizes respect, patience, and kindness in all interactions. Eleanor Winters raised her hand. Does this mean my native garden is protected? It's certified by the National Wildlife Federation and uses 80% less water than traditional lawns. Mrs. Chen smiled. Yes, Ms. Winters. Sustainable gardening practices are specifically encouraged in Section 3. She